We finished implementing the post action. Now it's time to implement the patch action. In the same way that we did here, you could do the same thing. Try to do it on your own by following the same steps that we previously followed. For example, instead of creating an Antelope writer, you can create an AntelopeUpdater. Instead of creating the create Antelope method, you could create the update Antelope method, and so on and so forth. Let's pause the video and give it a try. All right, I hope you made it. So we can clone this method here, and we're gonna call it patchAction. And then we rename the create Antelope writer with create AntelopeUpdater, and then update Antelope. Then we implement the create AntelopeUpdater, and we're gonna return an AntelopeUpdater interface and return new AntelopeUpdater. And also the AntelopeUpdater needs to have the facade, the response builder, and the mapper. So we're gonna just pass the same parameters here, and then we're gonna implement this class. We implement the same constructor as the AntelopeUpdater, and then we're gonna also implement the update Antelope method. In the same way that we used here in the create Antelope, the parameters Antelope's backend attributes transfer and GlueRequestTransfer, we're gonna do the same thing for the update method. We can add the read-only property here to these parameters. Then in the factory, we're gonna type hint here the AntelopeUpdater interface, and we still have to create it, so we can open the class, and then we can just right-click, refactor, extract interface, and then we add the interface suffix here. And now we can type hint the create AntelopeUpdater with AntelopeUpdater interface as response type. Verify that you have imported the AntelopeUpdater and AntelopeUpdater interface in your factory. So now we have the factory creation. We can go back to the controller and verify that these methods are okay. You can see that if we just control or command click on update, you can see that we go to the interface, and here we have to implement the update method. Now we can do the same thing that we did here for the Antelope creation. We have to create an Antelope transfer to be passed down to the Z layer and to the entity manager. We can do the same thing here, and instead of calling create Antelope, we just call update Antelope. All right, now let's go to the facade and let's add the update Antelope, and let's implement this method here in the facade. So we're gonna also return here an Antelope transfer, and we should create an AntelopeUpdater with the update method that we have to call from the persistence layer. So let's do the same thing here as we did for the creation. We create the AntelopeUpdater, and then we call update Antelope. Okay, let's just right click on the business layer and let's create the updater folder and the AntelopeUpdater class and the interface. And inside the interface, we define the update Antelope, which is going to receive an Antelope transfer, and it's going to return an Antelope transfer. We're going to do the same thing for the updater. We're going to implement the AntelopeUpdater interface, and then we're going to implement the method. And this class needs a constructor so that we can inject the entity manager like we did for the creator. And with the entity manager, we just call this Antelope entity manager update Antelope. Then in the business factory, we have to also create the create AntelopeUpdater, and we return an AntelopeUpdater interface, and here we create and return an instance of the AntelopeUpdater. Let's return Antelope entity manager update Antelope, and then we have to create this method. In the update method, we need to verify if the ID of the Antelope that we want to modify exists. And we can do it by having an instance of the Antelope query. And you can see here that we have the persistent factory and we have the create Antelope query. So we can just get an instance of the Antelope query and then search by ID and verify if that Antelope exists. So let's go back to the update Antelope, and we can call this get factory, and we can type hint here the method by pointing the get factory to the Antelope persistence factory. So this get factory, create Antelope query, and then we can call filter by ID Antelope, and then we can pass the ID Antelope. So we can have access to AntelopeTransfer, get ID Antelope, and then we call find one. So this find one is going to return an Antelope entity. If we don't find any Antelope, we can just return the AntelopeTransfer as it is. Otherwise, we're going to create an instance of the mapper, and then we're going to map the AntelopeTransfer to Antelope entity. Okay, we pass the AntelopeTransfer that we're receiving here in the update Antelope and the entity that we found from the database, and then we populate inside the mapper the new properties from the transfer into the Antelope entity. After that, we just call the save method, but we have to capture again the Antelope entity here in the mapper. And with the entity, we just call the save method, and we should return an Antelope transfer. So we return mapper map Antelope entity to Antelope transfer. All right, now we have the update method implemented in the entity manager. As you can see here, from the business layer, we have access to the entity manager inside the updater. You can see here the updater. We have the entity manager injected in the constructor. You can see here in the factory, in the business factory, that we inject the entity manager. Through the updater, by creating this updater, we can have access from the facade to the update Antelope. We call the factory, we create an instance of the AntelopeUpdater. The AntelopeUpdater returns an instance of the updater, and we can call the update method. All right, we have everything wired up because we have injected the facade in the backend's Antelope API. So you can see here that we create the updater. The updater is going to have access to the facade, and then in there, we're going to be able to call update Antelope by having access to the facade. So let's give it a try. We have the method here. We can open our file, antelopes.http. Let's create a new method, and this method is going to be patch. Then we're going to send the request to antelopes/ and we're going to try to modify, for example, Antelope with ID 44. Okay, so let's go back to the patch request. We're going to add the ID here, 44. This is the data. And let's rename it here with modify so that we can verify that we really modified the record. And let's give it a try. We also have to specify the ID of the resource here in the data attribute. So we have the type antelopes, the ID, and then we pass the attributes. So let's give it a try. You can see here the patch request. And then we have to fix this issue here in the Antelope Entity Manager, the getFactory method. And it doesn't find it because we have to extend the abstract entity manager. In this way, we have access to the getFactory. Okay, let's give it a try again. All right, you can see here that we were able to modify the content. You can see here now that it returned the record with my second antelope. You can see the record here, the date that it was modified. This is the record 44, and you can see created app and updated app. If we don't specify the ID antelope in the attribute, then we have to set in the controller that value to the resource ID. It means that when we receive here in the Antelope Backend API controller, we have the GlueRequestTransfer and we have the Antelope's Backend Attributes Transfer. So it means that here we should call Antelope Attributes Transfer, set ID Antelope, and then we would call GlueRequestTransfer, get resource, get ID. We can even cast it to int here. So let's give it a try. We have the response here, and you can see that we have the ID Antelope 44 in the attributes. We have the name, my second antelope modified. It means that we were able to modify that record, and the method is working correctly.